Every day, something dramatic happens in the Caribbean that affects our lives. We'll give you the details. We'll give you the facts on Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Here's Eddie Frederick.
So glad you can join us. The Atlantic hurricane season is here, and based on past experience, the region needs to prepare. This story takes the lead in today's edition of Caribbean Perspective for Monday, 5th June 2023. Details after this important message.
The hurricane season is now upon us, so we as Caribbean people need to remember to think safety and be prepared. Avoid venturing outside during a storm or hurricane, especially if there are strong winds. Rooftops and other debris are often blown about and can cause great damage.
Welcome back. The Atlantic hurricane season started June 1st, with forecasters predicting a near-normal season. According to information from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, the expectation is for the realization of 12 to 17 named storms. 5 to 9 storms are predicted to become hurricanes, and between 1 and 4 to become major hurricanes reaching Category 3 and 4. The first 3 hurricanes would carry the names Arlene, Brett, and Cindy respectively. The National Emergency Management Agency NEMA in St. Kitts and Nevis has encouraged citizens and residents to begin preparing. Glenn Bart of SKN Newsline shares the statement in part.
We take this time out to encourage the general public to do annual hurricane preparedness activities if you have not started doing so already. Get to know where your closest shelters are to you, as well as your district managers and NEMA volunteers in your area. We also encourage the general public to stay connected to the agency's social media pages for daily tips and precautionary information, end quote. Meteorologists believe the increasing strength of the El Niño weather pattern in the eastern Pacific Ocean will help to moderate hurricane formation in the Atlantic Ocean. But at the same time, surface water temperatures in the Atlantic are supportive of hurricane development. Glenn Bart reporting for SK Newsline.
In the meantime, the St. Kitts and Nevis Prime Minister Dr. Terence Drew will meet with the United States Vice President Kamala Harris in the Bahamas next week. Dr. Drew will be among Caribbean presidents and prime ministers meeting with Vice President Harris on Thursday, June 8, 2023 in the U.S. Caribbean Leaders Meeting. It will be co-hosted by Vice President Harris and the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, Philip Davis, current chair of the Caribbean Community CARICOM. Andre Huey of SKN Newsline reports.
According to the U.S. Embassy in the Bahamas, this meeting builds on the Vice President's previous meetings with Caribbean leaders in April 2022 to Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles and in September 2022. The Vice President's trip delivers on the Biden-Harris administration's commitment to advance cooperation with the Caribbean in pursuit of shared prosperity and security, and in recognition of the common bonds and interests between the nations. The U.S. Caribbean Leaders Meeting will address a range of regional issues. Vice President Harris and the Caribbean leaders will continue discussions on shared efforts to address the climate crisis, including by promoting climate resilience and adaptation in the Caribbean region and by increasing energy security through clean energy. The meeting builds on the U.S.-Caribbean Partnership to Address the Climate Crisis 2030, launched by the Vice President and the Caribbean leaders in Los Angeles at the Summit of the Americas. The U.S. Vice President is traveling to the Bahamas during the Caribbean American Heritage Month and will celebrate the long-standing people-to-people ties between the Caribbean and the United States. I'm Andre Huey for SKN Newsline.
And still from St. Kitts and Nevis, socio-political commentator Dwyer Astafan is of the view that there is too much copying of the worst of other cultures that adversely influence the way we think and behave and contributing to crime and violence. In a recent commentary, he reflected on the issue of gang violence and associated matters. Glenn Bart again of SKN Newsline has more.
Do you think that there would be gangs and the gang signs and gang behavior that we are seeing in these lands? Were we not mimicking what we see and hear from up north and in the west? Many of us want to be more Jamaican than the Jamaicans. The dance hall. Jamaica has nearly 200 gangs in it. and the gang violence there is notorious, globally so. Do you believe that all of these robberies and drug use and unhealthy eating and heavy dependency on drugs would be a reality here? Were we not brainwashed the way we are by this nonsense and death in many forms coming in from an outside culture or cultures? What percentage of the content of movies that you see, what percentage of the content is made up of guns and violence, lewd and crude language and behavior? Likewise for hip-hop and dancehall. I submit to you that without the violence and the crudeness, most movies would never be made, and many dancehall songs and hip-hop songs would never be published. So they're making money peddling violence into your brain and into your child's brain. You are paying for it, and you are paying the price for it. Because when you buy the mentality, then you have to buy the gun and all of the other things that come with a decadent, destructive culture.
As Fran said, the situation needs urgent attention as it is creating very serious problems in our society. He said it was important to implement solutions quickly, firmly, deliberately, and with strong leadership. Glenn Bart reporting for SK Newsline.
You're listening to Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick.
The International Monetary Fund wants Antigua and Barbuda's labor market policies to emphasize training, vocational education, and job search assistance. These are among points raised by the IMF's Executive Board in its latest Article 4 consultation with Antigua and Barbuda. It also comes as principal of the University of the West Indies Five Islands campus, Professor Denzel Williams, says the institution is perfectly placed to improve educational outcomes. ABS's Garfield Burford reports.
The International Monetary Fund says Antigua and Barbuda's economy is recovering but facing headwinds from multiple external shocks. Among those are the risks of further commodity price shocks, a global growth slowdown, a resurgence of COVID, and tighter global financial conditions. So the IMF's Executive Board has suggestions on how to support the recovery of the economy and make growth more sustainable. Two of those are improving access to credit and strengthening the workings of the labor market. In relation to credit, the IMF says it will be important to increase the role of the Regional Credit Bureau and Partial Credit Guarantee Scheme in enhancing credit quality, accelerating the lending process, and alleviating collateral constraints of borrowers. It also wants the country's insolvency law to be modernized to help incentivize lending. And in relation to the labor market, it is urging the authorities in St. John's to emphasize training, vocational education, and skills certification, together with job search assistance to reintegrate workers into the labor force. UA Five Islands Principal Professor Denzel Williams, an economist, says this is where the university can play a major role.
What the Ministry of Labour and the Ministry of Social Security and all those other agencies responsible for the human capital development will now have to do is to say, how are we going to get our human capital at a competitive level so that they can reap the benefits of the private and public investments that are going to take place in order to rebound the economy back to pre-pandemic level. That is going to be a critical element that needs to happen. Again, I will go back to where my specialty is. The University of the West Indies is a key partner in that process to help to upskill the population so that the local can benefit from economic transformation that is happening now.
It's a push Professor Williams' successor in the role will be required to continue as the economist transitions to head the Mona campus in Jamaica. The Five Islands campus is set for a major expansion to be bankrolled by a loan of $80 million from the Saudi Fund for Development. The IMF's suggestions also come as the new-look Harrison Center Abyss is set for completion shortly. Meanwhile, in relation to the fiscal accounts, the IMF wants the authorities to, quote, maintain efforts to extend the maturity profile of their debt in the domestic and external markets in order to reduce rollover risks. There should also be engagement with creditors to put in place feasible strategies for clearing remaining arrears, and new arrears should be avoided, end quote. The report acknowledged that the country's debt as a percentage of its economic output is on a downward trajectory after having reached 102% in the height of the COVID-19.
Trinidad and Tobago's Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, Dr. Amory Brown, says the Republic's world profile is at a level that it has never been before in its history. Terry Ann Brown Campbell of TTT News has that story.
For the first time since the 1970s, a Caribbean nation, Trinidad and Tobago, is in a major world leadership role. In 1972, Guyana held the position, and in 1978, Jamaica sat in the chair as President of the United Nations General Assembly. According to Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, Dr. Amory Brown, Trinidad and Tobago has spent the last 2 years campaigning for the position.
This represents the achievement of one of our major foreign policy objectives, which is to position Trinidad and Tobago in leadership situations in international organizations. The United Nations General Assembly being one such premier position, we are now holding the presidency.
Dr. Brown sees this as an opportunity for additional gains in the sphere of foreign policy.
This positions Trinidad and Tobago in a very unique situation for the next year until the year 2024, because we will now be chairing, Ambassador Francis will be chairing High-Level Week. All meetings of the General Assembly will be setting the theme for meetings, will be arranging summits and seminars, and will be steering the work of the General Assembly.
The Foreign and CARICOM Affairs Minister said there are additional objectives.
Trinidad and Tobago's candidature was unopposed. That is very significant, and that is not something to be taken for granted, because up to 48 hours before such an election, a member state can float a candidacy.
Trinidad and Tobago's ambassador to the UN, Dennis Francis, was acclaimed the president-elect to the UN General Assembly on June 1st. Terry Ann Brown Campbell, TTT News.
Rastafarians gained sacramental rights to marijuana in Antigua and Barbuda. Tiana Cole of HGP's Regional News reports.
On the same ground where the enslaved ancestors were forced to plant sugarcane, Rastafari on this small island nation are now legally growing and smoking marijuana. For Rastafari, the practice brings them closer to the divine. But for decades, many have been jailed and endure racial and religious profiling by law enforcement because of their marijuana use. The government of Antigua and Barbuda sought to right that wrong. The Twin Islands recently became one of the first Caribbean nations to grant Rastafari authorization to grow and smoke their sacramental herb. Quote unquote, "We're more free now," said Ras Tashi, a member of the Ras Freedom Foundation for the Ununification of Rastafari, who was arrested several times for growing cannabis but refused to plead guilty because to him it's a God-given plant. Rastafari elsewhere are pushing for similar religious protections. Experts and stakeholders think that Antigua and Barbuda law could give a boost to these efforts worldwide at a time when public opinion and policy are continuing to shift in favor of medical and recreational marijuana use. Under the same law change, the island government also decriminalized the use of marijuana for the general public. In addition to the expansive religious use granted Rastafari, people outside the faith can grow 4 cannabis plants each and possesses up to 15 grams.
Hubbard's is once again innovating the way you shop with its new online store, providing 24-hour shopping convenience. You can shop now for appliances, hardware, houseware, building material, and more. Free delivery island-wide. Start shopping now at hubbardshardware.gd. Safe, convenient, reliable.
I am Eddie Frederick. This has been Caribbean Perspective, a whole new approach to highlighting developments in the Caribbean. In the meantime, please continue to log on to CaribbeanPerspective.com for more daily news and more.